the 11th presentation in our fall 2024 Sustainability Research and Practice Seminar. My name is Bradley Flam. I'm the Director of the Office of Sustainability, and I'm very glad to welcome all of you today to this presentation. Our office is honored to co-sponsor this series with the Office for Research and Sponsored Programs and the Sustainability Council's Scholarly and Creative Activities Committee. So thank you again to all of you for being here, whether you're here in person with us or whether you're joining us via Zoom. I do want to remind you that we have one more presentation this semester. Next week, Dr. Ramona Stone from our Public Health Department will be closing out the fall 2024 seminar series. But stay tuned, we'll be back again in the spring semester with another series of 12 presentations. For those of you here in person, we do have a few copies left of our program for the semester. You're welcome to take one home as a souvenir. Those of you online, you can download a copy from the Office of Sustainability's homepage. So now, without further ado, I'd like to ask all of you to join me in welcoming our speaker today, Ms. Carly Lare.
Hello, everyone. Good to see you in person and good to see you online. If anyone has issues hearing me online, should they send a chat message? What's best? Yeah, chat's fine. We'll see it pop up. Okay, perfect. That sounds great. Awesome. Well, thank you all for coming out today. It's really great to be back. My name is Carly Lare. I am the Executive Director of the Chester Ridley Crum Watersheds Association and Westchester University alum. So I graduated here in spring of 2022, and I keep saying I'm a recent grad, but now it ends up being 2 years ago. And during my time here, I was a ecology and conservation major, but also actively engaged in sustainable efforts on campus. And it's really awesome to come full circle today and be able to present based on what I see in my everyday work. When I was in these seats about 2 years ago, hearing someone else talk all about all different topics, and it's been great to get to this point of working with CRC and talking about the work we do. So thank you all for coming today, and today I'm going to discuss the disconnect between communities and our waterways. And when I say disconnect,
I'm very
to this more.
I think you're good.
Perfect. When I say disconnect, we'll dive into this more, but really what I'm talking about is there's both a physical and a psychological disconnect from our fresh water. So we have fresh water all around us, and what we're seeing from the conservation perspective is that people aren't as connected with these streams as they once were. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. And this disconnect's really interesting because actually the majority of our country lives within a mile of fresh water, and a lot of areas even less. For example, Westchester has a lot of creeks nearby. I'll show a map of what that looks like. But it's really interesting how that disconnect continues to form despite our close geographic proximity to the water. And with the little amount that we interact with this water, it's hard for us to truly understand, one, the role this water plays in our everyday lives, and two, the impact of our everyday actions on the quality of that water. So today I'll talk a little bit more about that. But first, I want to talk more about the amazing job that I get to do every day. So like I mentioned, I work for the Chester Ridley Crum Watersheds Association, also called CRC Watersheds. And we are the watershed association that safeguards the Chester, Ridley, and Crum Creek watersheds, which span through part of Chester County and the large majority of Delaware County. So I put an X today on the location of Westchester, so where we're sitting. We are right now in the Chester Creek watershed and close by to the Brandywine Creek watershed. But we really focus on the Chester, Ridley, and Crum Creeks. Everywhere that you stand, you are in a watershed, and that means it's so important to practice proper land management. So first I want to ask though, how many of you in the room are familiar with what a watershed is? Two. Okay. Does anybody want to give me what they would define a watershed as? There's, okay, no pressure. You guys know.
The lands
Yeah, yeah, definitely the land surrounding specific waterway. Did you have anything to add?
Just that like the interconnected rivers, streams and other tributaries that, all flow into like one singular area.
That was good stuff. Both of those together, wow, that's amazing. So, exactly, it's the land that surrounds a waterway and also that interconnected network of streams that all feeds into one body of water. So, for example, we're in the Chester Creek watershed right now. So if I were to go outside in the parking lot and dump a bucket of water, eventually that water would end up in the Chester Creek. Not only would it end up in the Chester Creek, but it would start at that X and it would move its way down throughout the Chester Creek, eventually into the Delaware River. Delaware River is technically a coastal area because then that drains into the ocean. So everything we do on our land makes a direct impact on water quality, both in our community, downstream communities, and then ocean health as well. So it's super important for us to consider that when we take on our daily life and consider the impact of what we do. Otherwise, our watersheds are home to over 250,000 people, so it's super population dense. And our waterways source about 25 million plus gallons of drinking water a day. So the water in our area is critically important for a large amount of people. Otherwise, we have about 42 municipalities throughout our area, so a lot of different local governments, and 280 miles of streams that are in need of protection, including the tributaries. So there's tributaries, there's the direct creek, but it's that big network, like you said, that all feeds into either the Chester, Ridley, or Crum creeks. I want to go back a little bit to our history because interestingly, CRC was founded on the first Earth Day. And I found this photo in the archives, which I find so cool because it's so hard to find old photos sometimes, but we were actually founded to protest the construction of Blue Route. So Blue Route 476 that goes through a lot of Delaware County was a huge construction project that was happening around that time, 1970. And with a large road coming through the space, individuals in our community had that concern that that would lead to increased traffic, increased urbanization throughout the area, and then therefore have an impact on the environment. So super interesting. And like I said, we were founded on the first Earth Day. So that was 1970. Now it's 2024. So it's amazing the evolution of what our work has looked like. So today we've evolved to be an organization that does numerous programs throughout the area in order to really connect our communities with their waterways and creeks. So at the bottom there, you'll see a bunch of kiddos in the creek playing around, getting muddy, which the parents probably loved. We do our education outreach programs. And I really love these programs because that is our, I'll say, bucket of programs that get people engaged with the environment in a stress-free, welcoming way. I've gotten a lot of feedback over time from people who are interested in pursuing environmentalism, sustainability, that they feel threatened kind of because they don't want to try to be sustainable and do it wrong. But it's important that we open doors up for people so that they can go to an educational event and learn in a no pressure way. So that example was a Streams Learning Day with kids. They got in the stream, they pulled out macroinvertebrates and looked at them in an ice cube tray. And it's cool to see equally the children and their parents were asking the same number of questions and getting excited. So it's a really cool experience to see that. Also, we do tree planting, which we do all year long. So you'll see that in the upper left-hand corner, where our big focus is riparian buffer planting. So what that means is we plant trees on either side of a creek to really make a difference for water quality. Because trees, what they do is their root structures are kind of like fingers and they hold the soil in place so that that soil cannot pollute the water, which I'll talk more about that in a little bit. They also control stormwater that's flowing quickly into the waterways, and they can filter water before it gets into the water. So it gets into the bigger body of water, I should say. And then otherwise, we do our streams cleanup, and I love this picture because of the happy faces of the volunteers. The trash is not a great part of the picture, it's jarring. But I also picked this picture because it's in Westchester. This is actually behind the McDonald's and Dairy Queen up by Henderson High School. So CRC, each year we lead a streams cleanup. in March. And what that looks like is we have 35 different sites running simultaneously throughout the watersheds. So one morning, 2 hours, we have volunteers at 35 different sites. And typically we have about 1,000 volunteers out at one time. We've been doing this now for 27 years. And every year we are pulling out tons and tons and tons of trash from each site. So it means that once the trash is picked up, pollution continues to happen. But the great part about the stream cleanup, in addition to pulling the trash out of that streams and that tangible impact, is that volunteers are able to go into the creek and pull out this trash, and altogether there's that awareness of, oh my gosh, one, this creek is present, and two, there's this level of debris and trash and dumping in our creek. So this year alone, we pulled out over 34,000 pounds of trash in 2 hours from the creeks, and that includes refrigerators, tires, a big mix. Last year I was leading a site behind the edge on campus, the student housing, and we pulled out 3 air conditioners, which Walt on the call, you can attest to that. He was the one lifting them. But yeah, it's wild to see, and each site you learn different lessons about what's happening by really looking critically at what is being dumped in the water. So today I want to talk first about the evolution of our relationship with creeks and how we've grown more disconnected over time and what that looks like in the present day. And then I'd like to talk about the disconnect and its implications on conservation. So if we're disconnected from streams, how are we able to conserve them after that point if people aren't really aware of them existing in their neighborhoods in the first place? And then the gleam of hope, which we always like to end with, the path to saving our water resources and the importance of education on saving our water resources. So going back and looking at our land use historically, waterways throughout history have shaped what we know as the continental United States. And I won't do a really deep dive, one, because I don't have a specialty in geology, and two, to spare you all listening to my excitement about ecosystems. But historically, water has, like I said, carved through our landscapes. And in that process, it formed these beautiful large rivers that weave through these ecosystems and create a mosaic of different habitats within that river. And also in that process, they create wetlands, and this attracts all of these different types of wildlife that could flourish when there is a large amount of space for a wet area to exist. From river otters to beavers to all of the bird species, the bugs, they all rely on this expansive amount of water and those resulting habitats in order to survive. But these habitats and how water really carves the land in which it runs takes up a lot of space. So as European settlement came about and over the centuries, we got to this point where development and population growth caused us to change the flow of that water and really make space for the development that we were causing, like I spoke with the Blue Route, but also to make space for agriculture as well and urbanization. So in that process, we drained wetlands, we dug ditches that would take water out of the area so that we could grow crops. We straightened and channelized these creeks so they don't have that big, beautiful meandering mosaic of habitats, but instead they're a straight line that keeps the water off property. We've put streams underground and covered them up. This is actually a picture of the Mill Creek in Philadelphia that was put underground so that there would be room to build the city of Philadelphia to what it looks like today. And this is pretty common where our streams are going underground and we can't even see them. We also built dams to harness the energy of the water and also make sure that that water was staying in one place in a larger reservoir type structure. But all of this is to help with our effort of urbanization with population growth. And today we see this as well in different ways. And what I mean by that is there's still these structures that help us integrate our urbanization with the water resources that are out there. So every day we go over bridges throughout our area, especially in our area. Like I said, we have a lot of creeks, and I admit going over bridges, especially before my position, I didn't give much thought to what was running under the bridge, right? We're interacting with these waterways every day without giving it a second thought. The waterways are pushed underground, and they're pushed to the outskirts of development. So in a way, these waterways are forgotten by communities. They don't resemble the original form, which makes us not appreciate these creeks for what they really are. They're a critical natural resource. And in some areas, it gets really close to the development. So, does anybody know where this picture is taken? When? Where?
Goose Creek?
Yes, it is Goose Creek. Do you know what the buildings are behind there? That's Ramsky. Are you familiar with Ramsky? So if you go down through town and you'll find the Goose Creek, and that is an apartment complex that when there's a big hurricane, you'll see kids inner tubing in this water, which is not recommended. Please don't do it. But it just goes to show how much this water is integrated in our everyday life, but how it does not resemble the original form that we remember for its beauty, and how it is psychologically not considered the same as that original river to us. But in the modern day, our creeks look like this, and this is a natural resource that we need to protect. So like I mentioned, this is what a river would do if it had free range to move and meander and create that mosaic of habitats, but we've created something that looks very different now. So I wanted to zoom in specifically on land use in our area, because as I mentioned, a lot of this is fueled by urbanization, and it's difficult because of course we need to keep building to make up for population growth, but how can we do that in a responsible way so that we can make sure our water is protected? So if you look on this map, you'll see a couple different colors. You'll see agricultural, developed, non-residential, residential, water and wetlands, and wooded or undeveloped. We love the last two, water and wooded, but in our area with high population, it's not as frequent. You'll see a big green splotch in the middle. That's Ridley Creek State Park. And you'll see other forested areas throughout. One thing you'll notice is that the most predominant color is residential. So this could be older infrastructure or newer housing, newer construction that has been constructed recently to make space for new families moving to the area and new residents. But together, I want to zoom into an area that is notably developed with non-residential industry and residential as well. And that area is Westchester. And like Brad said, Goose Creek was the image I showed on the last slide. And unfortunately, the Goose Creek is one of our most polluted creeks in the entirety of our watersheds. So we have 280 miles of streams, and the Goose Creek, which flows a 2-minute walk from here, is the most polluted creek that we have, or one of the most polluted creeks that we have. So I want to talk a little bit about Goose Creek because I think it illustrates well this point I'm discussing of how waterways have been pushed to the outskirts of our development, causing them to become one, invisible to many people or virtually invisible, and how that has therefore impacted the conservation of that waterway and the current pollution that the waterway faces. So Goose Creek is located in Westchester Borough and flows into Westtown Township as well. What you'll see here is, I think, a great demonstration of the issues that the Goose Creek is facing. So on the right-hand side, you'll see a parking lot. This parking lot is the one with Goshen signs, Graham's Kitchen, right next to DK Diner. So on the right side, you see a parking lot, and then on the upper left-hand corner, that's where DK Diner is. This is right off of Gay Street and very close to Route 3. You'll see that there's a parking lot that's very frequently used. You'll see a dumpster perfectly located with a backdrop being the creek. And then you see this creek flowing through the back of the parking. And I will say, in 4 years as a Westchester student, I had no idea that that creek was there. No idea. And even when I went to clean the creek, I was like, oh my gosh, there's a creek behind this dumpster. And if someone were to miss the dumpster, we all know what would happen. It would go right into the creek. So we had some great Westchester volunteers actually come out on Earth Day and help us clean that creek. But what I'll mainly focus on is how, of course, this pavement has those pollution consequences of impervious surface and contributing pollution to that waterway. But at the same time, we have this dilemma that the creek itself is hidden. So community members aren't aware of the creek to even be able to conserve it and get to the point of conservation. And as I mentioned earlier, I used that word invisible. And that is in a way what our creeks have become. We drive past them every day. Henderson High School is up here behind us, and this is still the Goose Creek. And we drive past this waterway not thinking of it as a natural resource. We don't think of it as anything other than the side of the road where sometimes a lot of pollution ends up. And in this example, the creek is invisible to many of us, but it's also a dumping ground to many others. So that contributes more and more to the pollution that we are seeing. So, like I mentioned, being close by to development causes many issues with pollution because you're close to a high population density and a lot of land use. And at the same time, these waterways are invisible, so we're not quite sure of how we can conserve it, or we're not at the point where we recognize we need to conserve this waterway because we're not addressing it as a waterway that's valuable to us. This slide shows a study that we did at our most recent stream cleanup, and it's showing chloride levels, so salt. And at each of our sites, those 35 sites we did in March, we had a volunteer leader take a sample and measure how much chloride was in the water. You'll see many sites here, and you'll see two lines. So I have to pull this up because I don't get the word in. So the 50 milligrams per liter line within the water, that means that the continued exposure of wildlife to that level of chloride is not sustainable and will not lead to healthy stream life. 250 milligrams per liter, that is the amount that the DEP designates as too high for a potable water supply and can lead to health issues if it is the source of consumption. So on this map, you'll see that every single one of our sites, except one, meets that 50 milligrams per liter. And we have multiple sites that actually exceed the 250 milligrams per liter, which is extremely concerning according to the DEP. And interestingly, 2 of those sites are in Westchester. Out of 35 sites, 2 of the sites have that 250, or 3 of the sites have the 250 milligrams per liter of chloride, and 2 of them are in Westchester. So it shows how much that development and lack of awareness of the creek is impacting our conservation of the waterways. And where does this salt come from? It comes from a variety of things, but the main contributor is road salt. And of course, we have to be safe during the winter. And we think of putting road salt down on the roads just to be that quick fix for ice that we can make sure we're all being safe. But when we don't recognize that there is a creek running a couple yards off the roadway and we over salt, all of that salt will end up in the creek. Otherwise, Goose Creek also struggles with other types of pollution. The Goose Creek actually has a TMDL designation. This means that it stands for total maximum daily load. And a TMDL designation comes when the state recognizes that that waterway is under particular stress and we need to limit the pollution as soon as possible. So this TMDL comes from phosphorus going into the creek. Does anybody know what could be contributing that phosphorus? Yeah.
Pesticides?
Yes.
Herbicides?
Yes, pesticides, herbicides, fertilizer. Yeah, exactly. So different types of those chemicals have different amounts. And a lot of the time, people think that it's just an agricultural contribution, but the amount of lawns and residential use of those fertilizers contributes greatly to the phosphorus in the watersheds. There's other sources though as well. So phosphorus also comes from household items, certain types of detergent that we use.
Someone just commented.
Oh, Katrina, good job. And also can be found naturally in some of our soil. So like I mentioned, we don't typically think of soil as a pollutant because it's natural. However, we don't want sediment to build up in our streams for multiple reasons. One, because dissolved particles in the stream or incorporated particles throughout the water column, those are not healthy for stream life, but also with those sediments comes the attached chemicals that can harm streams. So phosphorus, sometimes heavy metals are going into the stream with these soils, and that contributes to soil pollution. With construction, we typically have more soil and sediment being picked up and put into the streams. This is let me see if it'll play. So this is a video of, like I mentioned, how some creeks are invisible. Sometimes a creek is invisible to a community member. Other times it is seen as an area for dumping. So there's no audio on this one.
It's like a tractor tire.
I just wonder what all.
Oh, there is. There we are. So this is video from this year's. What was collected in 2 hours behind the edge, the residential housing. Again, the creek I did not know existed was behind the edge, even though I lived here for 4 years. That was all collected in 2 hours, and every year we pull out a similar amount. So I wanted to also look at this impairment on a bigger level. This map shows the state designations of impairment for our waterways. So the state defines impairment as a creek not being able to fulfill its originally intended purpose. Very vague definition, right? But it means that the creek is not healthy enough to sustain life or be used for recreation or be used for a potable water supply or a mixture of those things. Orange means impaired. Blue means non-impaired. This is the Chester Ridley Crum watersheds. The majority of our waterways are impaired. And this is Westchester. And this comes from a state designation of impairment for multiple sources like we just talked about. So I want to show this video and transition into, okay, what do we do? And connect back to what other conservation organizations are doing. And right now we're at that point with community interests that how can we get to the point of conservation and action if in the first place our communities don't even know the creeks nearby that exist? So I'm gonna play this video from the Nature Conservancy, and I think they lay it out very nicely. Let's see.
Whew, time for a water break. Much better. You covered some distance today, but that's nothing compared to the journey your water made. Through rivers, lakes, wetlands, and springs beneath our feet, nature supplies the water that connects us to every living thing on the planet. Freshwater habitats cover less than 1% of the planet's total surface, and yet they are some of the most diverse in the world. They're home to fascinating fish, as well as otters, caimans, manatees, even dolphins, pink ones. And that's just in the Amazon. Float along or skip across to the fresh waters of planet Earth, and you'll find over half of all known fish species, like gar and elephant fish. Not to mention creatures like spoonbills, turtles, hippos, and grizzlies. But this life giver is not infinite. It's under threat like never before. We've been pulling too much water out, letting too much pollution in, and disconnecting the natural water flows that created this explosion of diverse life. And as a result, half the world's wetlands have been lost over the last century. 2/3 of rivers have lost their connection back to the sea. Freshwater species have plummeted by 84% since 1970. And already half of all people don't have enough reliable drinking water. But we can reverse the flood of bad news with the choices we make. We can adjust or remove barriers on rivers, returning them to their natural flows. We can help farmers keep fertilizers on fields and out of waterways. And we can partner with communities to protect the entire journey our water takes. In other words, we can have our water and drink it too. Because every drop connects us. All we need to do is work and flow together. Whew.
I'm biased because I love otters, so I always smile when I see the little otter, but the statistics are wild. And not a good type of wild, like the bad type of wild. It's 84% of freshwater species has declined since 1970. It's huge amounts and it's something that needs to be addressed. But despite that daunting view of things, those daunting statistics, I do believe there is hope, and I'll talk about that a little bit more with the question, how do we save our fresh water? And one of those problems that some people call a wicked problem, right? There's so many different contributors that people feel overwhelmed, and there doesn't seem like there's a straightforward solution. But I do think there's a place that we can start, and that is to draw connections to the water through education. Excitingly at CRC, what I've seen is that the curiosity is 100% there. More than I even expected, honestly. People are so curious to learn about freshwater because it is something that is so deeply ingrained in their lives, but that they have never formally learned about. So imagine there's something in your backyard that's been there for 20 years and you never even knew it was there. That's why that curiosity is there. So on the left-hand side, you'll see another picture of our Streams Learning Day, and that is Jimmy. Jimmy is so sweet and so funny, but he was zoomed in on that ice cube tray and those macroinvertebrates and so curious about learning. But like I mentioned earlier, it's so amazing because when you bring an adult into that situation, they're equally as excited and locked in to learn about the macroinvertebrate in the stream because this is our backyard. On the right-hand side, you'll see our Science on Tap. So we did Science on Tap at Artillery Brewing up in Westchester, and we do this twice a year because it's so popular. We decide to do different lecture presentations on a topic regarding freshwater. So everything's connected to freshwater, everything needs freshwater, so we can do a wide range of topics, which is awesome. This topic was beavers. I'm now a beaver fanatic, but you can see that there's a great crowd. We had about 70 people come out to listen to beavers on a weeknight, just for fun. And the beer helps, of course, but at the same time, people are so curious to learn about things that are close by that we're always hidden or invisible to them. And we have to stop the Q&A short because people ask questions for 30 minutes and could go for hours, which is really cool. But other topics we have done are talking about bees and their reliance on the water ecosystems, and talking about our stormwater management and where our drinking water comes from, and a wide range of other topics. So the curiosity is there, and once people are educated, they're, for the most part, ready to act, and we've seen that time and time again at CRC. So many people come out, and every time I see a new excited face that gets really into a tree planting or stream cleanup, it reinvigorates my passion because it makes you realize that all we need to do to start is to educate people about how important our freshwater is. And then people automatically find their own passion in it because we're all connected to freshwater in different ways. You'll see that some people plant trees with us, some people come out to their neighborhood stream and remove trash, and you'll see this picture down on the bottom. These are just 5 friends who came out for a bird walk. And they're so happy, look at them. And all of these people find their way to connect to the water. So I'll end with saying that, of course, this is a very daunting issue, and like I said, a wicked problem for us to face, but It's important to start with the education and realizing that it's all connected. First, we are all connected to the water. And whether we realize it or not, it's integrated in our everyday lives and it contributes to everything we do. But at the same time, it's exciting because water connects us all to everything else on this planet. And when we may feel disconnected at times from our communities, from our neighbors, from the ecosystem, the water we have in our neighborhood will flow elsewhere and eventually connect us all. And that's why it's so important to protect. Thank you. Any questions on that very big topic? And I'll keep an eye on the chat too.
Yeah.
I do.
Yeah.
So it's like kind of in question. I am much more familiar with like watersheds to the west, your watersheds, but what my work has been trying to accomplish is with the migrant communities, specifically Latino communities more involved in understanding where they're living. And so I'm much more familiar with where they are located in the Western, in the watersheds that I mentioned, but is there a large Latino community in those watersheds?
That's a good question. I'm just gonna restate the question. So we had a question about, tell me your name. Aria. So Aria mentioned that. Ariel, sorry, thank you. Ariel mentioned that in the Brandywine, there is a large Latina community. And it's important to educate different cultures on the importance of waterways. I'll say it's something that we're definitely trying to understand our demographics more and more because we have the Delaware County is really interesting because every township is like its own state. So much different culture, which is really exciting, but I'm still learning. But I will say that the Darby Creek has a large Latino population. And because of that, they're trying to modify their resources to be equitable with language, because that's so important. How are you supposed to learn if there's not materials offered in your language? So I definitely know with other conservation groups, it's a big focus, and I'm trying to learn from that moving forward.
Well, most of the countries that Latinos are coming from have such a strong connection to the environment anyway, whether that's a cultural connection or economic connection to the natural resources of the country. A lot of them live on subsistence farming, so they're connected that way.
Yeah.
And then they're disconnected then from their countries, but they still have that. They still have that curiosity. They still have that in them. So it's a major opportunity to really connect into that. So I'm trying to get the ball rolling, as it were.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. Thank you for mentioning that.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if there were other discussions about different cultures and environmentalism in the other seminars. It's a huge topic.
Yeah.
And it's really relevant, especially when people are coming from different countries with different cultures surrounding what we're trying to protect.
Yeah.
So it's definitely something that I'm glad you brought up and I want to keep thinking about and working on.
Yeah.
Are there any questions in the chat?
Not yet.
Not yet, okay.
People can unmute on Zoom too if you want to ask a
Ooh.
question in person, that's fine too.
Okay. Any other, question?
I know that in K-12, they have new science standards called STEELS. And part of that includes sustainability. And do you see this kind of being a push in the right direction to get people to become more aware at a younger age? And obviously, if they're aware at a younger age, it's something that they're going to have awareness throughout their lifetime, where you might have more people who realize that that little creek exists, between the DK diner and the little parking lot there.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's funny that you mentioned that because my mom's actually a second grade teacher. And the reason I'm so excited and jazzed about all this is because she is my mom and she raised me to be aware of watersheds and creeks and have me jumping around the creek and looking for crayfish, all that stuff. One thing I will mention is when I grew up in grade school, I had a very heavy amount of environmental education. We had an environmental specialist for our district that would come in and would bring in this big watershed diagram, and you would pour water on it, and you'd watch where all the water flows, and you would talk about how contaminated particle takes years and years and years to become uncontaminated, if it ever does in the foreseeable future. And right now, I'm not as familiar with the current curriculum, but I do firmly believe that everything that you teach grade school students is a much more sticky topic in their head than if you learn it at an older age, because I look back at my education and I remember those environmental education classes. I remember random memories about how one kid on the field trip got snipped by a crayfish, and it makes me laugh. And those are the things that you really form your beliefs around when you're at that age and get excited about. So I really think it is important, and I'm also taking that from personal perspective as a family that was all based on protecting our water. I don't know much about the STEEL program though, so I'm hoping that it has a lot of watershed focus. Do you know much about the program?
I don't have familiarity, but I'm
Yeah.
sure that is someplace on a website,
Yeah.
that the state has, because it's the standards for every student
Mhm,
who is basically between 5 and 18 years old, who
mhm.
is in a public school. So, I mean, that's a heck of a lot of kids who will be exposed to that.
Yeah, and it's with these standards, I mean, I have seen that science has shifted some in just some different ways. But I know from what my mom has told me, she has taken it on herself to teach watershed education for one time a day, and she had a watershed station. I think I kind of motivated her to do that based on my profession, but she just makes it part of her priorities. So maybe it's something that educators could also keep in mind if they can veer off lesson plans for a little bit.
And do you come into schools and do like, presentations?
That's a good question. We used to, so, more recently, we focused on, outside of formal education, so those weekend education with families, I would say a capacity thing at this point, so, I'm one of 5 staff members, and we mainly emphasize our programming on tree planting, tree cleanup, but I know other organizations do, like Perkiomen and Watershed Conservancy, they'll take field trips and do that education. So groups definitely do work on that, and I could see us maybe dabbling in the future. It's really important, and those hands-on experiences are really beneficial. Yeah.
Yeah, there's.
Question?
It was
Yes.
really, I thought it was a great question.
It was about,
Restorative,
Yeah, someone with their hand up too.
I
But we do have a chat.
Okay, I'll
question.
answer the chat question first, and then I'll.
All right. Yeah, you had an opportunity to connect the regenerative agriculture.
That's a great question. And it's becoming more and more of a topic in our area. Thank you, Katrina. And it's interesting because like I said, each of our municipalities is so different. Some of our municipalities, the agriculture topic isn't as prevalent, but in others, like the Upper Ridley Creek, agriculture is everywhere. I haven't had a lot of conversations with them personally, but I know each county's conservation districts, they were originally founded for soil health. So the Delaware County Conservation District and the Chester County Conservation District both put a big focus on going to landowners and making sure that they have healthy soils. But definitely something that I could become more familiar with. So that's a good question. Ted, I see your hands raised. Do you want to unmute?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Carly, could you tell us what kinds of trees you plant? And I think we all know that trees are great for reducing CO2, they absorb it. But what else do the trees do besides CO2 absorption? What do they do for what other benefits do they have? Okay, specifically, what kinds of trees and what benefit do they have?
That's a good question. Thank you. I could talk about trees for an hour, but I'll spare everyone. So we focus on planting native plants, and we stick strictly with native plants. So we plant a lot of sycamores, river birch, swamp white oak, all those water-loving trees. And more recently, we're trying to figure out, okay, how do we find trees that can be in a swamp, but also be dry for a month, like we've seen recently. So more recently, we're trying out some different species. some from the hardiness zone more south, but the big focus is all native. So that we can really regenerate those native habitats. And that's one of those benefits, like you're asking about, Ted. So we want to regenerate the native habitats and also improve the riparian buffer ecosystem through tree cover. So the trees do a lot of things. They do what we typically think about of sucking up carbon dioxide and putting out oxygen. They also, like I mentioned, they hold soil in place to reduce soil pollution. They also shade streams. So when you have tree canopy covering a stream, you keep the water temperatures colder, which is necessary. The colder water is, the more able water is to hold oxygen within it so that more fish and aquatic species can thrive. So we need to keep water temperatures lower in a rising temperature environment. So tree canopy is critical. And along with other benefits like being an ecosystem in and of itself, one tree and filtering water and slowing down water flow. So trees are environmental superstars. That's how we like to think of them. That was a good question, Ted. Thank you. Okay, so I see that we're approaching the end of the official time. I will be around a little bit longer, and I want to make sure I put CRC's information up. So if you have any questions, feel free to hang out either in Zoom or in person, but thank you for having me today.
Thank you, Carly.
Thank you.
Good job, Carly.
Thanks, Paul.
Great presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, if folks in person need to head to another class, or those of you online need to log off, please do. I know I have some more questions, and if you do too, and would like to stay on, feel free. Carly, I'm really curious about boundaries and how they affect your work, because
Yeah.
part of our campus, I believe, via Plum Run is connected to the Brandywine.
Yeah.
How does that, does your organization have to observe really strict boundaries, or do you sometimes make that, that transition to working just outside of Chester, Ridley, Crum?
That's a
Watersheds?
very relevant question. So thank you for asking that. And I'll put up our map quickly so that we can like look at the boundaries that we're talking about. So there are many watershed associations in our area, fortunately, for each of the respective watershed areas. So because of that, we try to stay pretty strictly within our boundaries. And I'll mention also that, so to the left of the Chester Creek watershed, there's the Darby Creek. To the right, or I said that wrong, to the left of the Chester Creek Brandywine. To the right of the Crum, Darby Creek, and to our immediate top of the watersheds, we have Valley Creek, Valley Forge, Trout Limited. So we try to stay pretty strictly within our area, just to make sure that we're not honestly stepping on toes of other organizations that may have future plans in place. Where I'm always collaborating with the other organizations. So I've met with Brandywine Red Clay, Brandywine Conservancy, Darby Creek Valley Association, Perkiomen Watershed Conservancy, so that we can kind of learn from each other and find best practices. But program wise, we try to stay within our boundaries. Westchester is unique, like you said. Pretty much half the campus is Chester Creek and half is Brandywine. But I'm always open to collaboration. If, for example, there was a campus-wide planting, that would be something that we would collaborate with Brandywine on. We're always open to it, but we try to stay pretty strictly within our boundaries.
Great.
Yeah.
Part of the question is because we always want to do what we can to help our community understand that even though we're in a fairly urbanized environment on this campus, the natural environment is still so important to the quality of life for us, for other creatures. And one thing in particular that I'm hoping our campus can do better, particularly on our north campus, right in the heart of campus, is to let people know that Plum Run, the West Branch, really originates pretty much, the headwaters are right underneath our north campus. And the stream is culverted until New Street.
Mhm.
And you can see it come out of the culvert
Yeah.
right behind that New Street garage.
Mhm.
But still, so many people don't understand that this is a really important natural feature of our campus. And I'm hoping we'll be able to find ways of providing signage or design to help even the casual observer understand that there's a creek flowing underneath their feet when they're on
Yeah.
North Campus.
Yeah, definitely. And during my studies here, I remember learning that and saying, what? There's a creek underground, and it's exactly what I was talking about. We have these creeks that have been hidden through development, and because of that, when a creek's not visible, it's not considered a creek or a natural resource that we need to protect. And something that the education is huge, and it's always a battle trying to figure out, okay, what's the best education for that? I remember being in a meeting with the sustainability office and trying to brainstorm. I think it would be cool if you could maybe paint like a artistic cartoon creek right over where the headwaters is or something like that. But that's something we grapple with. Okay, we want to do education, but we want to make it the most efficient with limited capacity, limited budget, make sure it's actually being heard. So something that education is tricky to do, but once it happens, it pays off big time.
Please keep in mind
Yeah.
that we'd love to do more with that as you
Yeah.
learn about how people in Chester, Ridley, Crum deal with this, or perhaps people in other watersheds
Yeah.
are helping to draw attention to these hidden streams under people's feet.
Yeah.
I was also very curious about your map that included Philadelphia and how few streams are still above ground in the city of Philadelphia.
Yes.
I'm fortunate enough to live right along the Ridley and
Okay.
Creek in
Beautiful.
northwest Philly.
Mhm.
So I am able to, within half a mile, get to a trailhead into the Wissahickon
Mhm.
Creek, but so much of, it's not because there aren't streams there, it's just they're all underground.
Yeah, they're not mapped. And that's it's concerning when it gets to the point even that they're not officially recorded as a stream because they're underground. What Wissahickon is also an amazing group for conservation purposes, and yeah, Philadelphia, when I see this on the map, it always surprises me. I wish there was a little asterisk that said there's still stuff here, it's just underground. Because it's equally as important there, if not more in some ways, because they are pretty much almost 100% impervious surface and concrete. So yeah, that with these urban centers, it's concerning that it's out of sight, out of mind in a lot of ways. Did I get any questions? No, okay, awesome. Those are good questions. You have one?
I do have one more question.
I see a sparkle in your eye. Another one.
Some of the faculty and a lot of the students at Westchester University have looked into the issue of road salts and their impact on Plum Run and Goose Creek. You said that graph you showed was from data collected in March, which would have been potentially at a time at which road salting was happening frequently. It depends upon the year, of course. If you took that same data in, say, the middle of the summer or in the fall before snow falls, would you expect to see the same levels of concentrations of chlorides?
It's a good question. I would expect that it would decrease. One thing I will also mention though is we had a particularly warm winter this past winter. And in proportion to other winters, less road salt would have been applied.
Right.
So that's one thing I just throw out there.
Now, do you know what year the data's from? or-
This is March this year. Yeah, yep. So we're hoping to do this on an annual basis to get a better understanding, and we partnered with Stroud and Willistown Conservation Trust, and what Willistown Conservation Trust is doing is they're doing it on a longer timescale, but in different areas. So we're hoping to get some idea of this over time eventually. Yes, the amount of salt does tend to trend downward in the summer. But it never goes away. So there's those additive effects as well year over year. So in the summer, this chloride level is not going to go to zero. And then the following winter, more road salt will be applied on top of that. So it's not like we have a blank slate the next season as well. So that's something to consider. During my talk or during the presentation, I listened to a chloride that presented this data from Willistown Conservation Trust. She offered some tips and tricks, which I thought was really awesome. One, the ability to report piles of road salt that you see, which I see all the time now that I'm more aware of it. I just see not even residential piles, but sometimes you see that maybe a contractor came out and left a pile of road salt, and because the cost is relatively low, they didn't feel the need to clean it up. But another encouraging thing that you can do is salt is reusable. If there's excess after it is put down for a really expected to be severe ice storm, the ice doesn't come. If you go back out and scoop it back into a can, you can save it for the next ice storm. So that's something that I think would make a big difference. Of course, that's not going to happen on a large level, but homeowners could do that. But yeah, the chloride issue continues to get more and more interesting. And I listened to the sustainability office presentation from a previous chemistry student about the underground heating that could work. I don't have much information on that, but hopefully there's some more solutions moving forward.
Yeah, that was a presentation, Martin Helmke
Mhm,
from
yeah.
our Earth and Space Sciences presented with some of his students. And I think we have a recording of that on our digital commons.
That was great.
You did also use the phrase, you said when we oversalt, there's spikes. at
Mhm.
these levels. Is it possible to use road salt but not oversalt? Is there a sort of ecologically healthy level of salting, road salting that can occur?
It's a good question, and I'm gonna say it, educated, I don't know on that. So of course, there's the ability to not overdo it. I think eventually we will find replacements that are healthier. But when salt is applied to these roads, even if it does serve its purpose of melting ice, the salt is still there and will still contribute to pollution, even if it does fulfill its purpose.
Right.
Because salt, its goal is to decrease the freezing point of the road. So with that in mind, I think there can be a more critical view on, okay, when do we use road salts? The exact amount, let's not just overkill it for the purpose of being better safe than sorry with ice. I think we can be more strategic with it. And I think that would make a big difference. It's one of those things, any conservation of road salts is good conservation. And then otherwise, noticing how fast a stream clears out that road salt is another important measurement to make. But at the end of the day, all of that accumulates in some body of water, so it's a tricky question to answer, but I'm hopeful that maybe they'll come up with a more organic solution for.
I think there are more organic
There are
solutions
some.
out there, because I went to Rutgers
Mhm.
and they were very limited with where they could put their snow and ice, so they used to dump it in the Raritan River, which ran right through campus. And they did not use any salt at all. They used some kind of ash or, grit or whatever that was not a fluoride product,
Yeah,
so that they could dump it into the Raritan without having the ecological impact. I just believe it's a more expensive, and with the way everyone's budget is, it's like the salt is a cheaper, like we said, solution.
Mhm.
So that's the go-to solution, but there are other things out there.
Yeah, exactly, and hopefully with the conversation of it, we transition to trying to find a way to decrease the price of the other solutions.
Or even to make a blend of the salt and the grit so that you are using less of the salt. And I would imagine too, that when the salt goes down on the road, it stays on the road for a while and takes a while to wash through and get to the creeks and so on and so forth. So that could be why the sodium level maintains over the course of time.
Mhm. Yeah, exactly, it's like that slow dissipation of it. But yeah, and I like your point of maybe even mixing the more natural, say gravel with the salt. And I think sometimes we miss out on solutions because they're imperfect, and what I mean by that is sometimes we set our sights on no more salt, that's the only solution, but being able to decrease the salt in any way is going to make a difference, and it's like that saying, the enemy of good is perfect. Don't
Enemy of the perfect is.
you all know what I mean. I always butcher it, but yeah, so people don't think of ways to just slowly decrease our salt use.
And it may be because nobody sells a blend.
Yeah,
If the township could buy a blend, would they buy it, even if it's a little bit more expensive?
yeah, exactly. That's good.
We're after 1 o'clock.
Yeah.
Probably ought to let you move on to the rest of your day and thank those who are still on Zoom for sticking with us. Thank you, Carly. We very much appreciate your making time to be here today.
Thank you. This is fun.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you everyone on Zoom.